A lot of things this case has stopped me from doing, traveling all across the world, making. So I just want to get it over with, and, you know, accept my guilty plea. I'm ready to get over with.
Anything you want to say to your fans?
Just say a prayer for them. I just need prayer. I don't need nothing else.
Well, Charleston White was celebrating you taking the plea deal. I think he even said he hopes you die in jail and stuff like that.
Yeah, I heard.
The biggest thing right now was that you actually accepted a plea deal for your federal gun case.
Yeah.
Now, how long have you been like fighting this thing from the very, very beginning?
I've been fighting for probably 3 years now, probably.
3 years.
The mood around Boosie shifted in an instant. One moment, it felt like he'd finally outrun the storm. The next, talk was swirling that his revived federal gun case could cost him a full decade. Word spread fast that the feds had pressed in again, and you could feel the air change like the walls were moving closer inch by inch. He'd already been through this fight once. In 2023, after a ruling landed in his favor, a judge dismissed the charge and fans exhaled.
Boosie going to jail! Oh, God! Oh, God is good. I keep telling y'all, street ain't got no God. God do not look after street. Boosie really thought he wasn't going to jail for that pistol. I knew he was going. He going to jail. All that newborn baby. Boosie won't get to see that newborn baby till that baby be walking and talking. Boosie going to jail!
By 2024, the same accusation circled back with federal weight behind it, flipping everything upside down. That whiplash is what hit the hardest, the sense that a win had been erased and the clock reset to zero. Publicly, Boosie tried to steady himself with faith. He talked about trusting God, about not wasting energy in courtrooms forever, about being done letting the system drain him dry. You could read the fatigue between the lines. It wasn't the usual fire he's known for. It was a man counting his breaths, knowing how quickly a headline can turn into a sentence.
Where the feds picked it up.
Now it was a state case. The feds came, picked it up. They had a ruling in the Supreme Court that went in my favor, and the case got dropped by the judge. The case got dropped.
The possibility of 10 years wasn't some internet scare. It was a number people kept repeating out loud, the kind that sits heavy on your chest. That's exactly when Charleston White burst out of the shadows, grinning like he'd been waiting for the announcement. The second the case hit the blogs, he was online, hands in the air, talking about how the streets don't have a guardian watching over them and how he'd said this day was coming. He laughed through it like a holiday. He said Boosie wasn't dodging anything this time. He even pushed the cruelty further, taunting that the newborn in Boosie's family would be walking and talking before there was any chance of a reunion. It wasn't just commentary, it was a celebration designed to sting. Charleston thrives on that sting.
He brought you up because you were attacking Kanye because of the...
Nah, guess Kanye West, it just happened. Nigga been coming at me. He been coming at me, it's just, you know, I can't respond to those people, bro, like, that's a danger to what I got going on. You can't take no risk of losing this shit behind, you know.
He's built a whole persona around turning other people's bad days into proof that he was right all along. When this update hit, he didn't frame it as unfortunate or complicated. He framed it like a scoreboard. To him, the revival of the case, the whispers about a plea, the tired tone in Boosie's posts, every piece added up to a trophy he could wave around. He insisted he'd called it years ago, that this was the natural end to a story he'd been narrating from the sideline. Meanwhile, Boosie's voice got quieter in a way that said more than any rant ever could. He spoke like someone who understood that a single sentence online can become a paragraph in a prosecutor's file. The bravado so many expect from him wasn't the point anymore. The point was survival, mental, legal, spiritual. He'd hinted that prolonging the fight might be worse than taking the deal. And for someone who's always prided himself on standing 10 toes down, that admission sounded like a man trying to protect whatever was left of his peace.
I ain't really got no opinion on him because, you know, my opinion can send me to prison. So I ain't really, you know, I ain't really got no opinion on them. You know, once you go to threaten people's kids, talking about you gotta lie. So, you know, I ain't the one gonna do all that. I ain't gonna do all that. You know what I'm saying? It's just, hey, you know, certain people you can't really express opinions on, and he one of those. You can't express how you feel because you might end up in prison. And I ain't getting tricked off the streets.
That contrast is what made the moment feel so raw. Boosie choosing restraint while Charleston treated the news like a victory lap. It set the tone for everything that followed. The celebration wasn't random and it didn't come out of nowhere. It lived at the end of a long fuse that had been burning for years, one that Charleston kept relighting whenever the smoke started to clear. But the celebration wasn't born in a vacuum. It sits on years of bad blood and baiting that pushed both men to this exact ledge. Boosie didn't clap back, he throttled down. He told people straight up that giving the wrong opinion could send him right where his enemies wanted him, behind bars. The message was simple: when folks drag kids into it, anything you say becomes a trap. He sounded like a man measuring every syllable, not because he was scared, but because he understood the cost of a single reckless sentence. The louder the noise got, the more he leaned into restraint, repeating that he wasn't about to get tricked off the streets. Charleston went the other way. The more Boosie pulled back, the harder Charleston leaned in. He treated the moment like proof that his whole philosophy, mock the streets, praise the system, was paying off.
Just them white folk, Boosie, you done got too much. You done let these niggas play you too, mother. This internet dumb and bitch. Say what little Tootie gonna do now? What little to say? Listen, Vlad TV. Vlad post everybody going to jail but Boosie. Somebody tag Vlad TV.
He talked like he didn't care if Boosie ever made it back home, grinning through lines that were meant to draw blood. Where Boosie was trying to lower the temperature, Charleston kept turning the knob until it hissed. That contrast told you everything. One man trying not to hand over ammo, the other manufacturing it on demand. The mood only got heavier when you saw how Boosie started to carry himself online. Less spark, more weight.
I'm gonna put your in jail, waiting for the FBI to send me the right kind of number, cause I'm finna make a report on your mother and people. And you make the man call your name specifically. The promoter specifically said your mother name, Lil Boosie. He implemented you and implicated you. To go to jail, back to jail. You gonna be on your knees, but them knees gonna be bleeding again.
The post about Faith read like a shield against the constant pokes. The feds on one side, Charleston on the other, and fans split down the middle. You could tell he was tired of courtrooms, tired of bait, tired of being dared into the kind of outburst that lands as a footnote in a case file. A single misstep and the I told you so machine would roar to life. Charleston kept feeding that machine, smiling on live, quoting himself, treating every rumor and setback like another notch on his belt. He wasn't just dragging Boosie, he was building a running narrative where every move Boosie made fit the prophecy. That's the game. Talk long enough, loud enough, and eventually reality will hand you a clip to replay as proof. Boosie saw the trap and stepped around it. He said he wouldn't speak on certain people because opinions can be weaponized, and he wasn't about to gamble his freedom for a moment of internet victory. That kind of discipline doesn't go viral, but it keeps you breathing. And in this chapter, breathing mattered more than trending. So how did they get locked into this standoff in the first place? To find the spark, you have to roll back to 2022 when a single shirt turned the culture upside down. The fuse really caught in late 2022 when one photo threw gasoline on the culture. Kanye steps out in that White Lives Matter shirt and the internet snaps in half. Boosie doesn't hedge. He calls it out plain, saying the move disrespected black folks. A lot of people agreed. It felt like a line in the sand. Artists, fans, and commentators all weighing in, arguing what the message meant and who it served.
I'm not a street kid. I'm not a criminal. I'm a kid who was raised to tell the truth. When my mama come in and say, son, what happened? Mama, I didn't do that. I got to pay for a lawyer. I got two lawyers, Carl Mallory and Louis Stearns. Louis Stearns became Judge Stearns, Judge Louis Stearns. But nigga, I had two paid for lawyers. My mama is a well-to-do mama. I'm just playing, I ain't playing. I'm an adolescent going through an adolescent stage of rebelliousness. I ain't no street. Hell yeah, I'm gonna tell on you. I've been telling since I was a little bitty boy.
Charleston didn't follow the crowd. He flipped it and came straight for Boosie, not for the shirt itself, but for daring to speak on Yeti at all. That's his signature move: switch the target, then make the messenger the headline. He didn't just say Boosie was wrong. He spun it like Boosie didn't even have the right to be in the conversation. And from that moment, it stopped being a debate about the shirt and started being a running feud about who gets to talk, who gets to judge, and who gets dragged when they do. Then he took it lower. He reached past Boosie and aimed at the family. Tootie Raw's name got pulled into the mud. King Harris, T.I.'s son, got dragged too. Looks, toughness, future, all of it thrown into the grinder for clicks. Charleston sneered that both kids would end up in jail one day like he was announcing the weather.
He pulled off the hammer back on the gun.
And then what happened?
It wasn't analysis, it was a prediction designed to sting, repeated loud enough to trend. The internet doesn't forget when you bring up people's children. It marks the moment as a new kind of disrespect. That's when people realized this wasn't just another loud page from the clout playbook. Charleston aimed below the belt by design because that's where the biggest reaction lived. It was calculated. Make it personal, keep it messy, and let the outrage carry the message farther than any facts ever could. Folks who were neutral flipped into defenders. Others shrugged and said chaos is the brand. Either way, attention flowed straight to him. Boosie didn't give the eruption the internet expected. No explosive rant, no long thread. He pulled back and let the smoke drift. That restraint wasn't silence, it was strategy. Because once kids are in the crosshairs, every word you throw becomes a weapon that can boomerang. Boosie knew the trap. He'd seen it play out before. You respond hot, the clip goes viral. Then a prosecutor labels it temperament. So he held his tongue even as the insults kept coming. Still, the temperature was rising. You could feel the timeline leaning forward, waiting for the snap. Charleston had found a way to turn one controversial moment into a baton he could swing whenever Boosie's name came up. And the more Boosie refused to swing back, the more Charleston wound up talking louder, getting bolder, aiming wherever it would hurt the most. Boosie's patience didn't end the feud, it hardened it. And when Tootie finally fired off a response, Charleston cranked the cruelty to a new level. The quiet didn't last. Tootie finally snapped and fired back online, calling Charleston old, messy, and everything in between, even telling him to go away for good. It was the kind of heat you expect from a son watching a grown man drag his family for sport. Instead of backing down, Charleston twisted the knife. He started mocking Boosie's health, tossing out cruel lines about diabetes like it was a punchline. That wasn't debate, that was spite dressed up as content. Then the timeline took a darker turn. Not long after, news broke that T.I. had been picked up on a gun charge. It was the exact kind of headline Charleston had been predicting out loud. He wasted no time claiming credit, bragging he'd called authorities, sent photos, and tipped off departments like it was a civic hobby. He went live and said he'd been telling since he was a kid that he wasn't street, that he plays by a different rule book. It wasn't subtle. He was daring people to be mad that he worked with the system while they tried to win arguments on the internet. From there, the accusations got wilder. Charleston started tossing out claims that Boosie was some kind of six-time killer using minors to do the worst kind of dirt. No proof, no paperwork the public could see, just volume repeated often enough to stick to the narrative like glue. That's the trick. Say it loud, say it a lot, and let the echo make it feel true. For Boosie, it meant every room he walked into had shadows already sketched in, every headline dragging a rumor behind it. That's when the whole thing stopped being just an ugly back and forth and started bleeding into real consequences. Talk about charges turned into court dates. Internet beef turned into questions for lawyers. Every joke Charleston cracked showed up with a second blade hidden inside it, and each live stream felt like another attempt to pull Boosie toward the edge. Boosie could see the trap but still had to stand there while strangers judged how close he was to falling. Through all of it, he tried to hold the line. He told interviewers he couldn't afford to have opinions about certain people because opinions get clipped, captioned, and stapled to case files. As a strategy, it made sense. As a life, it's exhausting. You could hear that exhaustion in his voice when he talked about faith and fate and the cost of fighting forever. What was once a war of words had become a slow squeeze, pressure from the feds on one side, pressure from a professional agitator on the other, with Boosie's family caught in the middle. And then 2023 added another blow. After a court appearance, Boosie got picked up again like the system had been circling the block waiting for him to step outside. Charleston turned the moment into a sermon, hopping online with preacher cadences and big declarations that this was divine payback. He didn't argue the facts, he framed the pain. He turned it into a parable where Boosie was the cautionary tale and Charleston was the voice that called it. That's the cruel genius of his hustle. Take someone's worst day and package it as proof. What came next only hardened the stalemate. Boosie sits down with Vlad, the frustration spills out, and by early 2024, the whole saga collides with streamer culture, turning a legal fight into a clout arena. The year wouldn't let up. Not even 3 months after Charleston dragged Boosie's family, the headlines flipped again. Boosie was picked up in San Diego right after a court hearing. It felt like a trap door opening under his feet. The kind of moment that tells you the system never really stopped paying attention. Before any dust could settle, Charleston had a live stream up, pacing, preaching, turning the update into a sermon about fate. He framed it like a lesson, called it divine order, and compared Boosie's mess to a parable where the ending was already written. It wasn't analysis, it was theater. He used church cadences for internet claps, mixing mockery with gospel rhythms to make humiliation feel like prophecy. Boosie finally let some of that pressure show on Vlad. He didn't rant, he reasoned. He said straight up he didn't want Charleston on the platform after the comments about Tootie. Not because he was afraid, but because there's a line you don't cross and still pretend it's just entertainment. You could hear the frustration under the composure, how every headline turned into a magnet for Charleston's monologue, how every legal move risked becoming a clip with the worst caption possible. Boosie kept stressing the same point: freedom first. Don't hand the opposition a quote they can fold into a file. But the shadow followed any anyway. Charleston has a way of attaching himself to a story and making it feel like he's part of the plot, even when he's watching from a phone screen. Every time Boosie's name trended, Charleston rose with it, like he'd built a ladder out of other people's trouble. People who never watched a Boosie interview started seeing Charleston's take before they saw any facts. That's the power of noise. It gets there first and dares the truth to catch up. By then, the routine was set. Boosie tries to steady the ship. Charleston turns turbulence into a celebration. Boosie leans on faith. Charleston says, "I told you so." One man pushes for calm. The other sells chaos by the ounce. And the more serious the legal picture became, the more Charleston's act clicked with a crowd that treats real lives like weekly series episodes. It's cruel, but it's also effective. Build a character, sell the narrative, and cash in on the comments. Still, there's a cost on the other side of the screen. A courtroom isn't a timeline. It's a place where words wear a suit and get read back to you flat, without the emoji. Boosie knew that. That's why he kept his replies short, his faith post steady, and his circle tighter. He could either fight the wind online or keep his head low and fight the paperwork in silence. He chose the second path, even as Charleston sprinted laps in the first. And just when you think the noise can't get louder, early 2024 brings a new twist. Streamers flip narratives and a viral moment that drags the saga into a whole different arena. Early 2024 turned the feud into a content carousel. Adin Ross had a huge stream lined up and Boosie's name was in the mix, a crossover moment that could have put him in front of a massive young audience. Behind the scenes, Boosie didn't want any of it tangled up with Charleston's orbit. He'd already seen how quick a simple appearance could morph into a headline with the worst possible framing. Then the internet did what it does. The narrative flipped. Adin hopped online and claimed he'd actually turned Boosie down out of loyalty to Charleston. Overnight, the timeline acted like Boosie had gotten curved, when the truth was he didn't want the circus in the first place. It was a clean example of how fast clout talk can rewrite a story before the facts have even found their shoe. That spin was so loud it pulled DJ Vlad into the conversation. Vlad wasn't subtle. He blasted the idea of standing with Charleston, pointing to the man's own extreme statements in the past and asking why a platform would treat that like a badge of honor. It wasn't just a media critique. It was a warning about what happens when chaos becomes a business model. The pushback mattered because it showed how far Charleston's name had traveled, far enough that other creators were staking their reputations on where they stood in relation to him. Charleston, of course, turned the moment into more fuel. He claimed promoters were being warned, said threats were being made, and then shifted into his favorite stance. The system is his shield. He bragged about contacting the feds, about keeping receipts, about being ready to turn phone calls into cases. It was the same message he'd been crafting for years. He's not playing by street rules. He's playing by courtroom rules, and he's happy to remind you where those roads end. To make it sting deeper, he dragged Bossie's health again, turning real medical struggles into a punchline designed to echo. Meanwhile, pressure was sneaking in through uglier channels. Boosie talked about getting calls from behind the wall, guys asking when he was coming to join them. That's a different kind of tension, the kind that gets into your head and sits there. When the prospect of a decade is already floating over you, those calls feel like the future dialing your number. Add Charleston's nonstop monologues and you start to understand why a trial wasn't appealing. Courtrooms are quiet until they're not, and if Charleston so much as showed up in the gallery, the whole thing could tilt into spectacle. He'd point outside to the cameras, run a live afterward, and crown himself the narrator of someone else's fate. That's the calculus people started whispering about. Maybe a plea wasn't surrender, it was self-defense against a circuit. Drag the case through months of hearings and it becomes a stage. End it quickly and at least the noise has fewer scenes to hijack. In that calculation, Charleston's unpredictability isn't just annoying, it's a factor. He's shown he'll tip lines, make calls, and turn any development into an anthem of told you so. And when a man tells you the rules he lives by, believe him. He'd already said he doesn't follow street codes, he follows whatever gets the job done. Through it all, Boosie's public voice narrowed down to faith and focus. Short posts, steady tone, a refusal to hand over the soundbite that could be read back to him later. That kind of discipline doesn't trend, but it's the language of someone who knows a prosecutor's printer never runs out of ink. The internet kept spinning. Boosie kept measuring the cost of every syllable, which is why the next question matters more than any stream or spicy clip. If you're staring down a courtroom that could turn into a show, do you take the plea and mute the stage, or roll the dice and let Charleston try to own the room? That's where the talk about his juvenile testimony history and the code arguments come roaring back. When people started whispering that Boosie might take a deal, it didn't sound like quitting, it sounded like strategy. A trial isn't just dates on a calendar, it's months of oxygen for anyone who feeds on attention. Put Charleston within shouting distance of that courtroom, and the hearing becomes a stage. He'd sit in the gallery like an audience of one, then step outside and turn the hallway into a press line, telling the internet he helped push the outcome. That's not a stretch, that's his pattern. He brags about calling officers, tipping departments, keeping receipts, and turning lives into live stream. If the choice is between a tight, controlled plea and an open-ended spectacle, you can see why the plea starts to look like peace. That calculation lands even heavier when you add Charleston's origin story story back into the frame. As a teenager, he testified in a case tied to a robbery where another kid pulled the trigger. The clip resurfaces every few months like clockwork. The internet stamps him with the ugliest label it has for that scenario, then asks how a man who mocks rats could live with paperwork of his own. Charleston never flinches. He says he told the truth, that he never signed up for any street code, and that survival doesn't need approval from comment section. It's the contradiction that powers his engine. He'll clown you for breaking rules he openly rejects for himself. That's how he stays unpinned. He moves the goalposts while you argue about the field. For Boosie, that contradiction isn't an abstract debate, it's a headache with real stakes. How do you fight a person who's proud to play by a different set of rules? If you snap, you're reckless. If you stay quiet, you look boxed in. Meanwhile, every rumor, every cruel punchline, every half-truth shouted like scripture gets folded into the public mood. A jury pool isn't immune to the internet. Neither are prosecutors who compile context. That's why Boosie's posts turn spare and devotional. Faith is one of the few languages that doesn't read like aggression when it's pulled into evidence. The code discourse makes the air even thicker. One side says Charleston is proof that the streets mythologize silence to protect the worst behavior. The other says he's a chaos broker who weaponizes the system while daring rappers to blink first. Put that tension inside a courthouse and you've got a trial that feels more like performance art. That's the nightmare scenario for Boosie, not just fighting charges, but fighting a narrative machine that keeps rewriting scenes in real time. So the plea talk starts to make sense. A plea doesn't erase the pain, but it short-circuits the theater. It limits the number of microphones, the length of the spectacle, and the chances for someone else to crown himself the narrator of your fate. For a man who's already said he's tired of courtrooms draining his spirit, less noise, faster ending can look like the only kind of win left on the table. And yet the culture won't stop arguing. Some hear plea and say it proves Charleston right. Others hear it and say it proves Boosie wise. Choosing sanity over spectacle. That split is the point. It keeps the topic hot, the comments rolling, and the stakes high enough that every new headline sounds like a verdict, which is why the next piece matters. What this does to legacy, to loyalty, and to the way people will talk about Boosie if a decade really lands. That's where the final chapter sits. Two futures on the table. Humiliation as a business model, and the possibility that a forced reset becomes a comeback no one predicted. The room is split. Some say Boosie's run finally met reality. Others see a survivor being hounded by a system and a professional agitator who turns pain into content. If a decade lands, Charleston will treat it like a victory parade. But humiliation ages fast, and hip-hop has a long memory for redemption. Time away can flip narratives if Boosie returns focused. The same clips used to mock him might end up sounding like fuel. That's why his voice has gone lean faith forward, fewer words, no ammo. A plea can look less like surrender and more like a way to mute the circus. Meanwhile, Charleston's game thrives on reactions. If the target stops feeding it, the show gets quieter. In the end, this isn't just charges and lives, it's legacy. Does a bad stretch define a name, or does endurance do it? The question stands, does Boosie rise again, or does Charleston get the last laugh? We'll see it in choices, not live streams. Stick around, drop your take, and we'll track what actually lasts when the noise fades.